So seriously, why do we need to wait to the end of the build until we show all those glamour shots? I'm guessing there's quite a few people that don't really care about how the thing got put together. They just want to see the finished product. So there you go. But for those of you who want to watch that, let's head into that now. And of course, be sure to check out the chapter thingamajinks at the bottom if you want to jump around, jump around, jump around. Let's go.
So because the BB for once don't interfere with the cable routing, I could get that out of the way first thing. And I got to use a trick I picked up from you guys in the comments on the Trek build, and that is to use a plastic bag in between the BB cup and the BB tool. It works brilliantly to get a really snug fit between the tool and the splines, as well as protecting the cup somewhat from scratching. So thanks for that. With the BB in, I took some proper measurements to confirm where I needed to cut the fork steerer. I don't have all this on video as it's pretty specific to me, but the measurement I took is the actual reach and stack to the center of the handlebar. This is just to make sure they are in the ballpark of my open and my Monda. You know, measure twice and cut once is even more true with this frame. That confirmed that I was okay running this bike with no spacers. The bearing top cap and the preloader under the stem will add enough height to get the stem where I wanted, so very happy about that. Because of how the preload works, it is as simple as cutting the steerer flush with the top of the stem. You definitely need to be sure of your position though, as you can't run any spacers above this stem. And I guess that's kind of a negative with this particular system. So next it was time to tackle the brake hose routing, and I started by installing the hoses into the calipers. Always easier to have one side taken care of before routing anything through the frame. I know I've been on and on about this hose tool in the past, but I really love this thing. Super simple to get a clean hose cut and super simple barb installation in one tool. Maybe overkill if you only build one bike every 5 years, but worth every penny in my book. First the hose nut, then the olive, a dab of grease, and the hose is installed in the caliper. No issues pushing the hose through the frame and out the bottom of the head tube. Here I had plans of being effective and combining the brake hose together with the Di2 cable through the rattle killing foam tube. I quickly realized it was a lot more fiddly than I thought, so I played with the idea of attaching the Di2 cable on the outside of the foam tube, but it would be very hard to adjust the slack once the fork was in place, so in the end I abandoned that idea as well and went with the standard Di2 cable clips to help with that rattling. I'm sure I could have made it work with some more fiddling around, but I wasn't in the mood, I guess. Another idea I had to abandon was to use shrink tubing on the hose and the Di2 cable going through the fork steerer, but this turned out to be almost impossible to get through the steerer hole in the fork without snagging. So yeah, quite a few fail ideas. None of this was actually necessary though, but it's always fun to experiment. With the hose and Di2 cable firmly in place, I could install the headset once and for all. On with the Echo stem and the hollow expander plug, tighten that up with an adjustable wrench. The actual preload adjustment is below the stem, and for that I could use this nice flat wrench from Abbey Bike Tools that is included with the frame set. The other end of the tool is used for that flip chip system to change the geometry of the frame, so it's a nice tool to have included with the frame. Apologies for the focus here, one-man cameraman and pretend bike mechanic. One of those two will suffer from time to time. Apologies. The front brake hose was easily pushed up through the bottom of the fork and fished out with a pick. That meant all the hoses and cables was ready to go into the handlebar. I had prepared the Enve AR bars before this with the Di2 cables needed for the junction and between the levers. So now it was just a task of fishing through the 2 brake hoses and the last Di2 cable. Luckily the AR bars are meant to be taped on the tops, so the distance the hose need to go internally is actually only a few centimeters in the middle. The rest will sit in grooves and be covered by the bar tape. It's pretty much perfect solution in my opinion. When the hoses need to be routed all the way from the stem clamp to the lever clamp area, that is when it can get pretty damn frustrating in my experience. Time to squeeze all those hoses down into the center of the stem and put on the top cover on the echo stem that also works as the clamp for the handlebars. It's actually quite tight to get the hoses down in the stem without pinching the Di2 cable, but after some mucking around it seemed to work out well. With the test fit done, I took it apart again just to apply some carbon paste, just to be on the safe side. The cover is a very precise fit to be able to get the top screws in, so I used my pick at the back to make sure I got those holes lined up at the top. Can easily see people cross-threading the screws here if you're not careful, and I almost did it myself. Continuing on with the Di2 routing, this time from the rear mech to the BB junction. Having the Park Tool magnetic routing tool is brilliant, but I did run into a little problem here. Turns out that with that Di2 cable connected to the tool and the hole in the chainstay being very small, it was impossible to get the cable through at an angle. And me being a bit impatient, I thought I'll just give the end of the Park Tool side a little bend so I can kind of hook it in. Well, that idea ended up breaking the tool, so yeah, good times. Ended up just taping the cable to the broken stump of the tool, and that way I could bend it into the chainstay, so it all worked out in the end. Well, ignoring that broken tool, of course. A dab of grease on the rear derailleur mounting bolt, and that went into place. Connecting the Di2 cable and installing the rubber grommet that came with the frame. Also came with solid plugs if you were to use SRAM axis for some strange reason. Last Di2 cable was from the seat post battery, and since I already broke the Di2 connector on the Park Tool routing tool, it's a lot of tools, I had to resort to the universal rubber end of the Park Tool of the routing kit, but that works fine as well, as long as the hole is big enough. The battery is mounted in the seat post with the battery holder that I think is from Ritchie. I had this for so many years now, my memory is a bit blurry, but I know Data makes one as well and a couple of other brands. Connecting all the Di2 cables at the bottom bracket with the 4-way B junction. One port will be open since I'm using a 1x system, so I will plug that with the Di2 plug. But before everything is pushed into the frame, I wanted to make sure everything was working, so I installed the shift levers on the bars and connected all the cables and made sure the derailleur was moving as expected. After that was confirmed, I put a small strip of handlebar tape around the junction, and to secure that I had to resort to electrical tape, as a zip tie would make the package a bit too big to fit through the opening in the down tube. A nice finishing touch with the Allied logo on the rubber cover. I like those small details. It all fits really snugly down there, so I haven't actually experienced any rattling sounds yet. Similar to my nervousness when it comes to cutting steer tubes, cutting brake hoses, especially when they are internally routed, gets my heart rate going. I'm using zip ties here to fix the hoses to the bar, just as it will be when the bar are wrapped and ready. I used an old stump of hose just to confirm how deep into the lever the hose will go, made a mark for cutting on the real hose, and having this hose tool makes the actual cutting and barb installation a breeze. But you're probably just as tired of hearing me talk about this as I am myself. A little bit of grease on the olive and the hose nut, and I noticed on the GRX levers the hose nuts goes pretty much flush all the way against the lever, unlike the Dura-Ace levers that have a few millimeters between the flange and the lever body. Just a random observation. With both hoses installed and ready, it's bleeding time, and I made a detailed bleeding video tutorial. So just like with the Trek build, I will not go super in depth here. If you want a more in-depth bleeding tutorial or installation, check that video out. I will leave a link in the description. But a quick rundown: bleed funnel at the lever, and as this is a dry system, I will use a syringe to push the Shimano mineral oil from the caliper to the lever. Side note here, after a lot of bleeding in the last few years, I finally invested in this nice bleed kit from Park Tool. Absolutely a luxury item with a syringe strap that attached to the frame. Not necessary, but it's very nice to have. After I have a decent amount of fluid in the funnel, I close the caliper bleed port and disconnect the syringe, pump the brake lever while tilting the frame back and forth until there's no bubbles left coming out at the bleed funnel. Last step is to attach a little drainage hose to the caliper, open the caliper port as I squeeze the brake lever, pushing out any potential air left in the caliper, and a few more pumps and the lever is nice and firm. Repeat that on the rear brake of course, but I think we'll move on from here. With the bleed done, the cockpit is nearing completion. Securing the hose and the DI2 cable is super simple with the grooves on the underside of this Enve AR bars. And the only thing worth mentioning regarding the handlebar wrap is the start when you have the DI2 junction box. I use double-sided tape to keep the junction in place, as well as the bar tape, and then begin the tape by cutting it diagonally, just the same way as I end it at the top. There's not much more to it really. Super simple to finish the tape on these bars with a very clear section on where the wrap should end. We are nearing the end of the build. On with the crank that dreams are made of. Pretty much the only weight we need part on this bike, together with the Berg saddle I guess. Chain measured and cut. Big +4 or the nearest ending with 2 inner plates as it's connected with a quick link. And big +4 is basically big cog in the back, big ring in the front. I'm obviously in one bike so it's only one ring. And then count 4 pins where you should make the cut. Arundel bottle cages on, the standard mandible on the C-tube and the side loader on the down tube for a bit easier life when the frame bag is on. Now, the pedals, and here was a slight change of plans. Yes, because I stumbled over a pair of used ES600 SPD pedals, probably the pedal I got most people asking me why I don't use. As you can see, I saved about 35 grams over the XTR pedals, but I never really seen the point of losing double-sided entry for a gravel bike. But since I found these used and at the real steel, I thought what the hell, might as well try them once. But I will talk a bit more about these pedals in a bit. Now, as I'm running this bike one by, I don't need the front derailleur hanger, and luckily it is removable. However, it's not the prettiest thing underneath, as you can see, with the raw untreated carbon. So I thought I could clean it up with something. I found this tape that you use to protect like insteps on cars and stuff like that. And I was a bit naive thinking this kind of 3K wave pattern would match the crank. I obviously should simply hang on with like matte black or something, but this will have to do for now at least. One thing I've done on all my recent builds is to use this Chainstay protector. Cheap thing from Amazon, but I really liked. But as I peel off the old one, I realized it was quite a bit thicker than it looked like. So I should just have kept that on, to be honest. But yeah, I know this one works as well, just a slight downgrade in the looks department. But hey, as I said in the reveal video, I originally ordered this frame with a black ink handlebar, and I got a few different K-edge mounts for both the Garmin lights, cameras and stuff like that. On this Enve bar though, the clamp area is simply not wide enough, so all my K-edge mounts are paperweights. I found this no brand universal mount on Amazon that will have to do for now until I found something that I'm happy with. I didn't pick the red one because I thought it would match the bike, but that was the only cover with overnight delivery. In hindsight, I should have waited a few extra days for the black one, but I'm an impatient man and it will not be the final solution, so yeah. I've seen a prototype Garmin Mount made by Allied for this exact stem, so hopefully that will be something they actually make available in the future. Fingers crossed. And that's it. Bike finished and ready for the first ride, but first we of course need to check that weight. So the complete bike, gravel wheels with the Terra speed and sealant, the lighter ES600 pedals and the Garmin Mount on 7.595 kilos. And that's pretty much what I expected, so very happy with that. And yes, for fun, I popped on the extra light road wheels with the 28mm Pro 1 tires, 6.99 kilos. And that's pretty good in my book, especially with the frame weight in mind and only real weight weenie part being that crank and the saddle, so happy with that.
Now, I did a few blunders during this build. As you saw there, I destroyed one routing tool, among other things. Some failed attempts of tightening up the cables and whatever. But the biggest mistake I did was I didn't really check this fork. This fork is actually made for either 180 or 160 size rotors. And of course, I didn't really think of it at all. I actually janked the front caliper from the Emonda because some other stuff might get on there eventually. And that was set at the 160 position on that adapter thingamajig. But when you have a fork for 180, you actually need to put the caliper in the 140 position, which I didn't do. And I realized that once I put down my road wheels just for test, and then I had already cut every hose and everything was connected. And when I tried to move the caliper down to the 140 position on the adapter, which is 160 position on the fork, of course the hose was too short. So I basically had to rip the whole thing out and install it again. But yeah, I was quite annoyed. But it's a good thing to note, a lot of gravel bikes these days are actually made for 160/180, while most road frames are still 140, 160. So yeah, there you go. Another thing I talked about in the video was the pedals. I tried the ES600 pedals, but if you look here, I actually have the XTR pedals back on. And that is basically because the riding experience did not improve, rather on the contrary, it actually made it worse. Those ES600 pedals, they don't really rotate or align at a perfect position like road pedals do, for example. So the hit rate or the miss rate of clipping in was much higher. These XTR dual entry side thing, there's like 99.9%, you just stomp on the pedal and you're clipped in. But when you don't have full confidence you can clip into the pedal without looking down, when you're on gravel and all that kind of stuff, it just degrades the experience on the bike, and that is not worth that, what was it, 35 grams or whatever. The first ride on the bike though did not go as planned, as I rode out at night just to see how everything felt, and I got taken out by a Japanese raccoon dog, aka a tanuki, ran into my front wheel. While I did manage to shave off a lot of speed, I still hit the deck. And if you're eagle-eyed viewers out there, maybe you could spot that one little dot of paint damage that I managed to cause to the bike. Yeah, I was very keen on making tanuki soup for dinner that night. That fucker ran away though. Speaking of the paint, I am so stoked with how the paint turned out. It is pretty muted when you ride in these conditions, really overcast, murky. But once the sun hits the frame or you put some studio lights on it, it pops like no other. Love this paint. Now, apart from that first incident, I have had a pretty pleasant experience on this bike this far. Probably about 500k or something, including this ride. And I even managed to get in a sneaky little bike packing overnighter trip, testing out all the bags on the bike and having that clean front end, the heating cables. I love it. I love it. The other week I was out on a longish ride, 200k, that had a bit of everything. Of course, mostly paid, but there were a few sections of gravel and some really destroyed roads, and the bike handled that without any issues either. I was especially happy that it felt really good on the gravel, both going uphill and downhill. So I'm pretty happy with that, and I think it would be pretty much what I wanted this bike to be. A bike that can do it all. And one thing that I'm especially happy about is descending on road, on tarmac. It is, I would say, closer to the Emonda than what the Open was. So I feel confident carrying more speed in and out of corners, stuff like that. Probably not the best thing for me, like crashing wise, but yeah, love that part of it. Well, I thought I would actually just mention a couple of the new bits that I already gotten questions about. So to start with, the handlebars, the Enve AR handlebars. Love the shape of the drops, having that little flare. It's good when you're in the drops, especially on rough roads. I still prefer to have those narrow hoods. So these are 40s, and with a 45 in the drops, I still feel I have the stability, whatever. And there we save the bike. The flat tops though, I have not gotten used to those really. They're just a bit too flat for what I'm used to. I like to have a bit more girth to grab onto. So I will probably try to double wrap the tops next time I change the bar tape. That might be a way around that. Now the Terra Speed tires, got a lot of comments about those specifically on the last video. I have no real issues with them. They perform well, both on tarmac, on gravel, on really shitty roads. I will say, however, that the comments about the durability seems to be very true. Even now I can see some of the knobs already gone down, probably about 50%. I don't see these lasting much more than a season, but for me, as long as I can get that, I'm pretty happy. I always like to try new tires anyway, but in terms of performance, I have no real issues this far. Now I did try the whole flip chip thingamajig, and just like advertised, it's actually really simple, especially when the brake mount moves with the dropout, so no issues there. However, unless you have matched hubs, it still probably means that you will have to do some adjustment on the brake caliper, as well as potentially even the gears. So might not be that easy to do, especially when you have two different kind of wheel sets. To be honest, I didn't really feel that much of a difference when having those chips flipped to more racer geometry, I guess. And yeah, in the future, I'll probably just leave the chips in gravel mode, even when I use road wheels. I don't know. If I want to go full crazy race, I will just use the Emonda anyway. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed and got something out of it. Until 9200, peace.